When the cat wasn't sneaking his way into the heart of SAPS operations, the controversial tender don was also trying to build a private international airport terminal, all with Nedbank's financing help. That didn't really go anywhere, and investigative journalist Jeff Wicks details yet another failed venture by Vusimusi cat Matlala next.
Would have catered for pretty much the uppermost echelon of Nedbank's client base, both VVIPs and their black card holders, who would have access to this lounge, which is, fine dining experience, a fully stocked bar, sleep pods, smoking areas, all the kind of creature comforts you want in an airport experience. But where Matlala's service would have differed was that it was fully integrated with this very controversial security company. So for the most important of Nedbank's clients, they would be picked up in armored cars and flanked by rifle-wielding security guards that Cat usually had around him before he went to the big house.
Later in our trending topic, never a dull day in Mzansi, a member since 1995, ousted GNU Minister Dion George quits the Democratic Alliance, and finally a Limpopo student lost it with his lecturers, with On This Day in South African History that's heard later in the show.
New episodes of The Lead air Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m.
In Rauby's Pointless Braai quiz today, which cigarette company is pulling its operations out of South Africa by the end of the year? I'll give you the answer at the end of the show. My name's Graeme Robenheimer. This is The Lead, and this is the South African story. To our top story today, and well, look at that. It only took us 2 weeks now before the cat finally made headlines again in 2026. Of course, all thanks to our very own investigative journalist, Jeff Wicks, who's live on the line with us now from Randburg. How's it, Jeff? How are you doing? Compliments of the season. I think the time on me getting to say that is pretty much ended now. It's elapsed.
Yeah, I think we need to start talking about a moratorium on that. But thank you. Thank you for having me, Graeme. Good to see you for the first time in 2026. And as you say, Cat Matlala is a bountiful basket that keeps bringing us together.
Sure. For those not watching closely over the holidays, and I was one of those unfortunate few that still had to keep the news mill in top gear, but Correctional Services suddenly announced out of the blue that Vusimusi himself was suddenly going to be moved from Kgosi Mampuru, the second prison, just as you enter Pretoria, to the Supermax facility in Bongweni in Kokstad. What was the official reason here? They said at the time it was normal procedure, yada, yada, yada. But of course, many of us smelt a rat. What did you manage to uncover, if anything, about why this move suddenly happened around Christmas?
Yeah, it was interesting, especially so close to Christmas, and it's something I wish I had more answers about in terms of their motivation. But the implication is significant. I mean, eBongweni is the country's, in fact, probably the Southern Hemisphere's most secure prison, and I think it's a testament to the risk that they see Matlala is. I mean, this is also, remember, the same person who has previously been caught with a cell phone in his prison cell. So his life is going to look markedly different from his previous domicile, which was Kgosi Mampuru. He will now be interred in a cell for 23 hours of the 24-hour day, and good luck getting a cell phone in there. Even Ananias Mate couldn't do it.
Sure. Okay, but now in terms of the News 24's latest revelations on our front page is that in 2023, before the cat had landed the now cancelled multi-million rand SAPS Health Services tender, he was pursuing this massive finance deal with Nedbank to do what? Open an ultra-luxurious private airport terminal at OR Tambo. Sounds like the Fireblade terminal number 2.0, of course, famously owned by the Oppenheimers. Looks like you wanted to emulate the same thing. How did you uncover this?
Well, we managed to get our hands on a concept document authored by Mr. Matlala himself, where he basically set out in chapter and verse what his intentions were. And as you say, it was going to be a private terminal of, not insignificant amounts of luxury, which would rival Fireblade. And I mean, in name, he called it a lounge. But realistically, when you looked at the context or the content of that concept document, he would be responsible for security screening. He would have access or the ability to fast track people through customs. And I mean, you and I both know we've been in airport lounges before. I'm sure our listeners have as well. That's not the kind of service you get from the existing lot. And so certainly it tells us a lot about Cat Matlala's ambition, not only in the state procurement realm, which we've been focused on leading up to this point, but also into the private sector.
Yeah, take us through some of these extra luxe services or features that he was proposing to Nedbank to try and get the funds to make it a reality. I mean, it's what you get processed a lot quicker. There's a lounge, all the nice things. You get placed into a really nice high-end vehicle that would take you to the aircraft itself. The sort of like the par for the course, Los Angeles Hollywood movie style, extras, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a story about all of the trappings of wealth, and that's what Cat envisaged, and going by his own writings. It would have catered for pretty much the uppermost echelon of Nedbank's client base, both VVIPs and their black card holders, who would have access to this lounge, which is, fine dining experience, a fully stocked bar, sleep pods, smoking areas, all the kind of creature comforts you want in an airport experience. But where Matlala's service would have differed was that it was fully integrated with this very controversial security company. So for the most important of Nedbank's clients, they would be picked up in armored cars and flanked by rifle-wielding security guards that Cat usually had around him before he went to the big house. And, it was luxury to the extent that they would, manage your bookings overseas, both hotel and car hire. And then for those with the most money, they would be chauffeured from this terminal or lounge, whatever the semantics dictate, from that area to the steps of the plane. So it was lofty, and it tells us a lot about his ambitions and his greed.
Do we know how advanced the application was with Nedbank? And of course, I mean, at this point, we know that it didn't really go anywhere, but and Nedbank would say, well, it didn't go anywhere, and so therefore we don't really need to provide, any further context or discussion there. But surely his links to the Tembisa extraction scandal were a little bit more well-known publicly at that time, thanks to your reporting, Jeff. So what do we know about this deal? Did it really get into any advanced stage at all?
Yeah, so we know that it amounted to naught. I mean, that's trite at this point. And when we got this document, one of our first ports of call was Nedbank. And their explanation was that they receive proposals such as this all the time, and it didn't pass their internal checks and balances, so they walked away, but not with any sort of significant detail. What we know from our sources and from, the story gathering process is that there were certainly multiple meetings between Cat VIP Security, Mr. Matlala, and Nedbank, and it was advanced to the stage where there was actually a site visit and a tour of the proposed site of this facility. Now, Nedbank, of course, one would understand they would want to put a bunch of sunlight between themselves and Mr. Matlala, but this is where context becomes important because, we found him at Tembisa Hospital. We made his role publicly clear in February of 2023, and not only the dubious procurement that he was behind, but also his illegal use of blue lights. That's when we published those now, relatively famous videos. And all of the talks between Nedbank and Matlala happened months later. So, and it's also difficult for Nedbank in a sense, because it's not as if they could, claim ignorance by saying, well, we didn't know who owned the security company. The proposal document is signed by the group president of Cat VIP Security and Protection, Vusimusi Matlala. So, that's the difficulty. And I think it tells us a lot about accountability, really, because, I mean, if our arms of law enforcement, as disjointed as they are, had acted on Tembisa Hospital faster, I believe it's unlikely that Matlala would have ever come anywhere near that SAPS tender. And certainly it would have likely prevented the talks with Nedbank even getting to the stage that they did.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. He really feels to me, in the absence of everything that we know, kind of like the ultimate opportunist, or as he would self-style himself in papers that you've previously seen, corporate-wise from him in the past, a philanthropist of sort. But he was just throwing, he was throwing anything at the wall, hoping for it to stick.
Yeah, I mean, we can't doubt his entrepreneurial spirit, but what we must doubt, and what we've, been at pains to highlight for people, is the manner in which he succeeds. The Tembisa procurement was, obviously it stank to high heaven. It's the same story with his 360 million rand SAPS tender. And, an issue like this really gives us insight into the way this man operates, because if you read that document, he frames himself as one of the foremost individuals in the private security sector who also, by chance, has experience in the catering and entertainment realms. Where he gets that from, I have no idea. But if you read the bid documents for the SAPS tender, he's supposedly the foremost figure in occupational health and safety. This is a business journeyman of note that we had no idea about up until News 24 started publishing.
Yeah, and I don't want to say at this point, is this the end of the saga as we know it? Because who knows what else is going to fall into your lap tomorrow, Jeff?
No, certainly not. I think if we're talking about a forward-looking sort of posture for 2026, Mr. Matlala will be a significant point of focus for us. He remains a very interesting figure in our democracy, and we'll make sure that, if the arms of the state and law enforcement don't uncover this information, we'll make it plain, because this is someone who has benefited from the public purse for so long. And I'm sorry, if you're being paid by the taxpayer, you are open to public scrutiny, and that means that I have the license to dive into your life, and I will.
Absolutely. Finally, people may be wondering the level of accountability that would await somebody like the cat in 2026. Of course, we've seen a very big announcement, surprise, some would say, of Advocate Annie Mutibi, a very, I would say, respected, celebrated corruption buster, shifting gears from the Special Investigating Unit and is now going over to the National Prosecuting Authority. Some would argue a poison chalice, of course. Really got his work cut out for him. We've, the cat's only in prison for, and I say only, but, given everything we know, only in prison for a failed attempted hit on his former lover, actress Tebogo Tobojane. So where do we stand with his next court appearance, and what does that shift to the NPA by the advocate say to you as we move ahead in 2026 and find some sort of level of accountability?
Yeah. So Mr. Matlala will return to the South Gauteng High Court on the 29th of January. And I think we must just remind our listeners that he's not only in the big house for the attempted assassination of Tobojane, his ex-girlfriend, but also for two other individuals, Joe Sibanyoni, a taxi boss, and Sienki Mokobong, who was a DJ, all three of which were botched assassinations. So there's quite a stack of attempted murder charges. And then something that I think will be, front of mind for Matlala going into this year is the fact that IDAC is investigating the award of this tender. And from what we understand, that probe is at somewhat of an advanced stage. So it's likely that this will not be the last of the criminal charges that Matlala faces. So I think that's going to be important. And as to what that criminal trial looks like, I think it really is going to be a litmus test. I think because this is such a high-profile matter, because Kat Matlala has become part of our lexicon, it will be watched with keen interest. And, this is, again, a matter that both the National Prosecuting Authority and the police can't afford to let fall by the wayside, And again, we can talk about accountability for hours and hours and hours. The reality is, we have an understanding of exactly who the bad actors in our society are. It's time for them to face real consequences. We've not seen that in the lead up to this.
Sure. Thanks. That's Jeff Wicks, our intrepid investigative journalist. Thank you so much for all your time. I really do appreciate it. Of course, this isn't the end of the saga as we move into 2026. See you on the lead very soon, I'm sure.
Godspeed and good luck.
You're listening to the latest edition of The Lead on News 24 with Graeme Rowenheimer. If you've got an opinion on what you've heard so far, drop us a short voice note on our WhatsApp hotline. That's 072-562-3179. Trending topic.
Moving to our trending topic, and he's been a member of the Democratic Alliance, the DA, since 1995. And he achieved his most senior post for the party by being appointed a cabinet minister in the government of national unity. But Dion George has now called it quits as a member of parliament and a member of the DA following a rather public falling out with party leader John Steenhuisen. Now, this spat all started when George was axed from his position as environment minister whilst at COP30 in Brazil and then replaced with Willie Okamp. Now, George was reportedly removed by the DA itself for failing to toe the cabinet's policy lines on COP30 and regulated rhino horn and ivory trading. Allegations, too, of bullying and sexual misconduct suggest that George was deeply unpleasant to work with. George then suddenly claimed Steenhuisen may have allegedly misused party funds and then cancelled his DA credit card. Steenhuisen in turn claimed George was just bitter about being booted out. DA Federal Council Chairperson Helen Zille intervened and asked the pair to simply shut up about the issue and be formally probed by the party's Federal Legal Commission to check for any wrongdoing. This process has since cleared Steenhuisen. This while the DA also checks to see if the pair had brought the party into disrepute. George, in the meantime, claimed that his DA cabinet successor Ocamp and his family had been unduly benefiting from the lion hunting trade in South Africa, which Ocamp has since publicly denied. Now, today, in an interview with ENCA, George came out alleging that he's been pushed out of the DA, which he calls a quote-unquote intolerable situation. He even goes a step further to claim Steenhuisen's been captured by the ANC and, quote, criminal interests due to his poor finances which leave him vulnerable, and that the DA is muzzled in the GNU anyway, unable to effectively lead South Africa. George says he's asked the public protector to investigate his axing as minister, claiming that the DA Federal Legal Commission's whitewashing of the credit card issue was the final straw for him. Zille, meanwhile, in a short statement to the press a little while ago, says it's unfortunate George quit without letting the DA FLC process run its course, as he now faces allegations, amongst others, that his former ministry staff got unjustified salary increases. That process continues this coming Monday, whilst the DA prepares to elect its new leaders in April this year. Sure, what a saga. Any view on the matter? Drop us a comment below.
And finally,
ending off with On This Day in South African history, the 15th of January 1999. Well, on this day, a tragedy unfolded at Tompi Seleka Agricultural College in Limpopo. Student David Malabane made headlines at the time after he had failed to graduate several times and became enraged after once again receiving failing results. Now, with firearm in tow, he went to the campus and accused lecturers of deliberately failing him. He reportedly threatened staff members before shooting and killing 3 lecturers. Malabane then fled the scene by a car, but police later caught up with him near Masheshane. And when he realized officers were closing in, though, he sadly stopped his vehicle and turned the gun on himself. That's On This Day in history, the 15th of January 1999. That's courtesy South African History Online. In our final edition of The Lead this week, we asked in Rauby's Pointless Braai quiz, which cigarette company is now pulling its operations out of South Africa by the end of this year? The answer is, of course, British American Tobacco, or BAT. The global giant now claims it just cannot compete with how big the local illegal cigarette markets become in Mzansi. By the end of 2026, some 230 local jobs are expected to be cut. Now, if this was your answer, you get no prizes. You get nothing. It's pointless. But you may have the quiet satisfaction of sounding very informed around the Braai place. Some say that's priceless indeed. $110 gets you a News 24 subscription. It's also indeed priceless as the world of knowledge comes to your fingertips. Stay in the know right here on The Lead and, of course, News 24. Thanks so much for choosing this very podcast to keep you informed. To be reminded of each episode, hit the like, follow, and subscribe buttons on all of our various platforms or wherever you get your podcasts. My name's Graeme, and so long as there's trusted news first, we'll always have The Lead.